Welcome to another episode of In Good Company, the podcast where we explore the evolving landscape of leadership. I'm your host, Dan Jones, and today we have a fascinating topic that is reshaping the way we think about leadership, the impact of artificial intelligence. Our guest today is Michael Molinaro. Michael brings a wealth of experience in learning and leadership, ready to dive into how AI is transforming leadership styles, decision-making, processes, and the very fabric of organizational culture. We'll explore topics like how can leaders leverage AI to enhance their decision making? What are the ethical considerations of integrating AI into leadership roles? And how is AI changing the way we work and interact within organizations? So whether you're a seasoned leader, an aspiring manager, or simply curious about the future of work, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. Stay tuned as we dive into the world of AI and its profound impact on leadership and organizational culture. So let's get started. Welcome to In Good Company, Michael. Nice to have you with us. How are you today?
I'm great, Dan. Thanks. It's a joy and an honor to be invited along.
Well, it's a joy and honor to have you with us also. So I'd like to get straight into introducing you, if I may, or giving you the opportunity to do so. So we always ask our guests the same question, which is to give us an insight into you. Tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
Yeah. So thanks. Yeah, I've spent my career in learning and leadership development roles, mostly in financial services organizations, serving as chief learning officers. In certain organizations. I retired from inside corporate life in April of this year, and am now a senior consultant with Berman Leadership Development, working with them on issues like this and the way we're developing leaders for the future. I've had senior L&D and CLO roles in the United States and in Europe. Spent 12 years in your part of the world there, whereas in London, running learning for two big investment banks. So that's really me very quickly.
And a wealth of experience to draw on today, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So thank you again for giving us your time. Before we go any further into the episode, any regular listeners might have noticed that the introduction sounded slightly different to normal, and that was because we used generative AI to write our introduction. So all we did was pop your name into it, mine, and a bit of extra context, and it generated everything else. So we normally would ask a part of our team to create that introduction.
Yeah.
So, and obviously that was today done by a machine. So that arguably is a job that there's no longer going to be done by a human. So therefore, are you kind of concerned that AI will be smarter than people and maybe take over our jobs, leadership roles, and possibly even organizations?
Well, I think I'm one of a number of people who are beginning to help organizations think through the implications of adoption of AI, machine learning, generative AI, large language models, all these kinds of new technologies. I'm not a computer scientist, and nor am I a futurist, but I've spent a lot of time talking to them about this kind of topic. And I do have a sense of where those believe. I had a conversation a couple of weeks back with a colleague who's talking about this, and he said, I think where we are with AI right now, it's like a really good graduate student. And so if you ask it to edit a paper, if you ask it to sketch something, write an introduction for a podcast on AI, it will come back with something decent that you want to take a look at and ensure it. But that's not the full potential of this. And we're opening the floodgates. He didn't say this is me now. I believe we're opening the floodgates, or have already. We'll talk about that, I hope, to kind of allow more disruptive practices around work to take part of this. So am I afraid? I think, and will it become smarter? I think it will begin to impact the way we live our lives in ways that we haven't yet fully thought through. And what I'm hoping to do in conversations like this and others I'm hoping to tee up is get leaders and those who work with leaders like us to begin getting them to frame the questions, because right now we aren't even framing the questions. We are so interested in making ourselves adopt the affordances of AI. We haven't yet begun to consider what our colleague Wendy Lee called the indignities of AI.
Mhm.
And I think the indignities of AI is need to be considered and walked through. And I can say more about that as we get into this today. So I'm more concerned about, will it be smarter? I don't know what smarter means. It will be able to do things that we don't want to do. It will probably also replace us doing some things that people like doing, like create art and writing and poetry. Some really bad poetry out there that's been created by machines, and some that you can't tell the difference between what machines do and what poets do. I worry about those kinds of things, and I think in organizations, I worry about the way it separates people from the way they think about their work. And that's what I want to kind of get into with you today.
Yeah, well, I mean, the topic I think is so vast that nowadays that it's as you've said, and I quite like what you said there about we've not necessarily thought about all the questions yet. We've kind of we're still figuring stuff out in order to then ask those questions. I think, I wasn't of this showing my age here, but I wasn't necessarily of an employable age when the internet came out. But I would imagine that and kind of computing in that respect. But I would imagine people had the same thoughts and feelings about technology as it was then as people maybe do about AI now. I would imagine there's similar anxieties and similar kind of worries there, and potentially similar questions that will have been asked, or similar types of questions. But I think one thing that's kind of we've seen over the time is the way that certain technologies have replaced roles. Do you think that there's going to be a shift in the way that we employ people into organizations? Do
Yeah.
you think that it'll be more? Do you think skills will be more important than the jobs that need doing?
Yeah. These are two separate but really related conversations, and we should let me try to piece back a little bit of how I think this comes together, and even just refer back to some of the things you said earlier. I'm way older than you. I'm not a digital native, and so I was working when the internet became important and was invented. I was in my 20s, and became attached to work and being forced. I don't recall the trepidation that I'm feeling about, maybe because I was young and naive and excited, and maybe there were some older folks who were worried about it. But I seem to feel like what the feeling was at the time was, this is going to democratize information. This is going to put the power of connectivity in our hands. And I think to some ways it's going to allow for things like remote work. And it didn't do that for a very long time. And then, the last 5 years, all kinds of reasons have caused that to happen. So I think that those promises may have been fulfilled. I think why this may be different is because we're talking about not just a set of hardware that enables connectivity be people and how data gets managed between that. I think we're talking about a set of algorithms which manage what I know, what I'm able to know, and the way I used to provide value into organizations is disrupted.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were jobs that were disrupted by the internet. Of course there were. There were jobs that don't exist anymore and new jobs created. So I think that's one thing there. I think the skills thing is also very interesting and related. We've got a lot more data about, thanks to the way data is collected in all organizations for all kinds of sources, and our ability to use for the growth of data science as a capability. We probably have more insight about what individuals' capabilities are today in organizations than we may have had ordinarily. Some organizations are promoting the idea that jobs will go away, and what we'll have instead are individuals who have skills, and we'll deploy those skills against work as we need it, kind of like in SWAT teams. You need something done, you'll find the 6 skills that you need, you'll find the people who've got those skills at the right level, and you'll deploy them against that work.
Yeah.
That's a model. And I think what's happening now is this is becoming increasingly important in organizations, because every board of a Fortune 100 company is being told by their consulting advisors that they have to be worried about this now. So it's gotten a lot of attention. including in a lot of places that I've worked in the past. And I think that attention is absolutely warranted. I'm cautious about both the promise and the threat of this. I think, and there's two things to think about. One is the promise of it. People want jobs. They don't want to be seen. I think people want jobs because we affiliate so much of our purpose and the way we live our life to the job that I have. And if I'm an accountant, right? Or I'm a professional communicator like yourself, or I'm a chief learning officer, or I'm a lawyer. That's how I see myself. I don't see myself as a set of atomized skills that come together and are used in pieces as I need them. So I think there's going to be some difficulty in convincing people to get excited about the idea that you don't have a job, sit on the bench till we need you. When we find we need somebody who can do that corner kick really well, we'll pull you in and let you do that, and you go back on the sidelines. I think that's probably not the way people want to. Hopefully, I don't think we'll want to live their lives. That's the one thing. The second piece about skills, which is the way to think about it, is it's going to take a long time to get really valid and useful information. I've been in there's a cottage industry of skills and skills companies being promoted into organizations around this, and that's a good thing because it's framing the issues in an interesting way. But the best I think we should be right now in organizations, and I know I'm taking this more slowly than I should. My colleague Anna Arcella says, let's be skills curious. I think that's the right thing, right? I should be thinking about the kinds of things I do really well and how I can promote their use inside my organization. And if machine learning and data science and artificial intelligence allows me to understand the skills that I have in a new way, I should look at that, go through my own sense of validation because the machine isn't always right, and see where I know. So I think that's where this is starting to come together. Is we're seeing in two ways. We're seeing artificial intelligence being used to collect and validate skills information about employees by saying, well, it looks at your LinkedIn profile and says, if you've done this job, you've done these 6 jobs, our algorithm believes you have the following skills. I think that's and it's proving to be difficult to validate because you could be really rubbish at your job. It's not done it for a while. It doesn't mean you do your things really well. There are great accountants and not so great accountants, and it also doesn't take into account all the skills that I may have that I'm not able to deploy in the jobs I have over time, right? So I think we got to be careful about that. But so it's going to put pressure on it. The other thing it's going to do is say there are a host of skills, leadership, and I hope we get to this, and others that have to do with the deployment of AI itself. And, learning to write, prompts that allow, like you wrote one to tell me the introduction for this podcast today. I would be interested in actually to understand how that prompt was written, because it gave you a really good, way of doing it. And there are people who teach that. So that's an interesting new skill we can teach people to do, but that will become easy and superfluous, and natural language will take over that, and it'll just go ahead and do that today. So long answer.
Yeah, well, there's so much to pick up on there, and one of the key things there's 2 key things that we will definitely be talking about is the impact of AI on leadership and leadership roles, and also on ethics. So you brought up ethics there, so we'll definitely we're covering those shortly. In fact, let's get straight into what we kind of think of as traditional leadership roles. How do you think AI could or is transforming traditional leadership roles as you see them?
Yeah. The way I see leaders responding today, and I think this is in many ways because they are welcoming the affordances of AI, is by looking at the risk profile of adopting certain AI models in organizations, the productivity gains that they'll get, the cost of doing these things, the way their data is being managed by outsourced providers. So it's a very managerial, administrative view of this. And I think that's probably stage one. What leaders need to be doing, and I'm talking probably about leaders at the enterprise level, is begin working to frame the questions about what will happen to us as an organization and us in our culture as we allow AI to become further embedded in our work practices.
Yeah.
So if I'm an actuary at an insurance company and the role of actuaries disappear because the role of the actuary becomes around, well, how do I understand the risk associated with a model rather than doing the actuarial work myself around what the cost of their lifespan may be, for example. That's a very different job. And I think what leaders need to think about is it separates people from some important parts of work. It really does uproot them in a number of ways. Dan Pink described this whenever his book was written in the late 90s, probably 10, 20 years ago in the book Drive, around purpose, mastery, and autonomy. I think there's a richer framing for that I like to use, which is around capability, care, connection, and community. And I think what happens is, for me, those 4 C's, go back to our phrase, the indignities of AI, raise challenges in those areas. And also, let me get into that a little bit with you. One is this idea of capability for me. So what I know today, what I know and do matters, and it makes a difference to the organization where I'm working. They're paying me to do this work, and what I do matters, and what I know matters. As capabilities for AI begin to expand, and what I know how to write an introduction to a podcast, no longer matters because I can ask the robot to do that for me. I begin to become separated from this sense of capability. What am I here to do? What do I know how to do today? Right? That's the first one. The second thing is care. And I like this word, and I use it in both senses. The 2 senses are what I care about, what things mean to me, and how am I cared for by the organization. I think, if I become a set of atomized skills and I become devolved, my relationship to the organization gets devolved into one of plug and play. I become an appliance. And I wonder what that means about the way I'm cared for when I'm not seen as a fully viable person who has needs by virtue of my connection to this company, but one who's got, and that was probably always an economic construct anyway, but one now which instead is, I don't know what the basis for care is when my work can be done by an algorithm or a set of algorithms or a robot in some way. That's the second one. The third is around connection, and it's connection to other people via my work, and connection to the outcomes of my work, and more importantly, what the outcomes of my work mean. I think one of the challenges AI throws up to us immediately is the outcomes of the responses don't matter to it. The response you got from Gemini or whoever wrote your AI thing when you asked it to write an introduction to the podcast didn't matter back to that algorithm. It mattered to you. And when you write one, you stand back. When you write a good one, if you're doing this interview, you stand back with a sense of pride and say, well, that really went well. And I feel a connection to that, and it means something to me. The algorithm is indifferent to what this means.
Yeah.
And so there's this separation from work and its meaning. And I know this is getting deeply philosophical, but I think where this goes. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize. We're uprooted from why we enjoy work in the first place is because I can derive a sense of meaning from what I do every day. And so it doesn't mean anything to the robot to do the work. It does to me. And the last one is, this last C is around community. It's my relationship to others, my ability to support those around me in my work, because that's important. I like to help people out in my job. We know that's a big driver of engagement at work for individuals. And also my own status in the community. I think, and people don't talk about this, but I think community status is really at threat if AI becomes a leveler and status is determined by what I know and how well I deploy what I know, and what I know no longer matters, or how I deploy it no longer matters, then my status in the community is automatically diminished. So what does this mean for leaders? I think we've got to think about these 4 issues around capability, care, connection, and community. And what should we be asking ourselves about those things now? I was really, really optimistic the other day when I opened LinkedIn, and my friend Julian Birkinshaw, who was dean at London Business School, has now moved to Western University. He's the dean of the Ivy Business School. Published the first piece I really ever saw from a serious academic around some of the issues of not only the technical capabilities, but the organizational, cultural, and moral capability impacts of AI. And so I'm like, okay, here we go. I'm getting a sense that these threats are being taken seriously by somebody with some academic cred, influence in what leaders are taught, because he runs a business school and is going to begin to frame these things. So maybe the tide is turning a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I really like what you were saying about the 4 C's, that with capability, care, connection, and community, and what AI is and isn't capable of doing in terms of, I mean, essentially leadership, and we've talked about this on previous episodes. Leadership is a very, or should potentially be a very human role, I would say, in terms of, particularly if you're a leader of, people. Whereas and I think there are certain things that AI is just not necessarily equipped for yet. And as you say, a lot of it comes from that meaning piece, particularly around emotional intelligence, for example. There isn't anything around that yet, or at least certainly not in a moment, without having to consult a device. If you find yourself in a moment that needs immediate action, AI isn't necessarily going to be capable of that yet. And I'm going to use the word "yet" quite a bit when it comes to these.
I think it is yet.
Because I think that AI is developing so fast that and especially if we end up with maybe certain types of wearable technology that's powered more by AI, maybe that would provide, things that are always listening. Oh, you could try this now at this situation. It's
my God, you want to hear it? Listen to this. Apple just applied for a patent in the US for technology for their earbuds that will pick up essentially be running mini brainwave technology through your ear pods.
Right.
So as you're listening, it's learning what music you like because it's seeing how your brain responds to that. But as you're listening to a podcast, or even as you're walking around in the world, it's going to start. Imagine data being sucked out of your brain and made available to algorithms, to essentially to advertisers or broadcasters around the way you react to things. This is terrifying, isn't it?
Well, I guess it depends on who you are, because I think that some people might find that terrifying. Other people might embrace it. I mean, I think there are certain people out there who I won't name, but that I think are possibly even developing themselves or within their company the idea of an implant, that does essentially I guess the same thing of what you've just described. So that your own thoughts no longer become your own thoughts, because you're connected to an AI model that can generate those stuff for you. So I think that's been a really interesting point that you've brought up there about certain applications of AI-based technologies that can be applied, and the aspect of fear that goes with it, because and I brought this up to another guest, and they went, "What is it exactly that you're afraid of?" They kind of challenged me on it, and I was like, "Well, I'm not entirely sure. I guess there's a part of the unknown, and the unknown of what the world will be like, with certain technology. I can't remember exactly what technology we're talking about. I think it was just broadly AI." And I think it's because it's kind of that one step closer to, some of the sci-fi movies that you've maybe watched
Yeah.
from, the 90s, like The Matrix springs to mind, where essentially, it's one step closer from detaching us as human beings, as a mammal, as an animal, living on this planet, that we're detaching ourselves further by adopting more and more of this type of technology. It's my own personal view.
I think that's
but it's an interesting point.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that there are things to worry about. It's the idea of the sorcerer's apprentice. We are never the masters of our tools, regardless of what we think. And you only have to look at that case to understand it's rooted in reality. We are never the masters of our tools. And this need to constantly make ourselves available of any device or set of technology which allows for better functioning is just welcome. And I asked a colleague of mine who's an executive coach, a very, very qualified executive coach recently, why do you think that is? And he said, well, I think people are just really lazy. Now, this is from a psychologist. He said, and they'll welcome things that make their lives easier. And I don't know that I like that. I was talking to Rita King, who's a futurist at a company called Science House. And we were talking about this topic. And she said, well, the guys around everything, or what we said together was the guys around everything is, let's get frictionless. Let's just make things easy for people. AI does that. And I'm like, that's the problem. Because friction, we live our lives with the outcomes of friction. Friction provides heat. It provides stickiness. It provides attachment to things. Friction gives me something to talk about at the end of the day. If everything is easier for me, I don't know, right? I don't know what I'm going to get to do myself.
Yeah.
And we look at ease and affordance as being the ultimate goal of things, instead of saying, well, really the ultimate goal of things should be around, what does it mean for me to be here? And AI doesn't care about that.
Well, it's so true. And I often thought, that if this is general pub conversations that we have, that if what happens if everything got switched off tomorrow, like what skills would we have to be able to actually survive? Because because like you said, we've come so attuned to technology and its use.
Well, we saw last week Microsoft had the CrowdStrike failure, right? So the world was shut down for 12 hours and because a third-party vendor made a mistake in the way they prepared a certain update. I think that's
it's certainly an insight. I mean, I think I guess that's it. And I think the where there's that true awareness of going, okay, I can see the benefits of this. I might choose not to use it because I don't want to lose that particular cognitive ability that I would potentially lose by using. I think if there's more, and it all comes down to education, doesn't it, and experience, I suppose. But I suppose that it could be a bigger conversation, which I'd love to get into, but I'm conscious that I may go off on a massive tangent by doing so. So I'm going to bring myself back in a minute.
Dan, I think what you're feeling is the urge, it seems like some of us have been feeling now, is to begin to frame these questions. And I don't know, that's what I'm calling for, right? That's, if I were to write a manifesto, it wouldn't be to say this is the way we should respond. It would be, we have to frame a set of questions that we need to begin addressing as leaders in organizations, as leaders in organizations of all type, educational, commercial, governmental, in every way, inside and outside organizations, academia, to say, how should we be responding? And response is the right thing. It isn't because I believe we have, as I said earlier, we are in the sorcerer's apprentice mode. We have no choice but to adopt this. It's happening to us. So how are we responding? And I think the response we as humans still have to create for the cultures of the places we lead is the one that is left with us. And I do that by those 4 C's that I outlined earlier. I still have a chance to create community, care, etc.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. The questions around all of this, I think, are really important, because by not asking them could lead us down a path that we don't want to be down. I think, I mean, by the sounds of it, we're both the same, and we're both naturally curious about, you know, the potential risks. And I've been labeled as a skeptic for certain things before, because I always kind of go, I always think what's wrong with a certain thing before I accept it and use something.
Yeah.
And I guess it's probably that fear of the unknown and the fear of what if, and all that kind of anxiety that leads. And this is what this other guest was pointing out. And yeah, I think there's certain things that just by raising the question and asking the questions and gaining that knowledge is a way in which to help understanding, I think, and and potentially change your approach to using particular things. I think that's certainly, there's certainly no harm in asking those questions.
Oh my gosh,
I would think
it's not that there's no harm. I believe leaders are obliged to ask these questions to get underneath this issue. And it isn't just about how much money will we save, what will be the impact on productivity, how will this impact our risk profile, et cetera, et cetera. It's much more around what will this mean for us as a company long term, and for the people who work here, and for whom we as leaders have some kind of obligation, given their, you know, they are with us of their free will. And so, and if we don't believe there's any obligation there, I think we've sort of fallen down as a leadership community. There are philosophical and moral questions that underpin all of that, which is probably another conversation. But I'm heartened that we'll begin to frame those things based on just over the past couple of month or so. I've just seen more and more, and then Julian's paper, as I said, I think really.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, and I suppose what the kind of pivotal point of this episode, I guess, is now really in the sense that we've kind of been talking a lot about how maybe we should be challenging the use of AI. But I think it's probably safe to say that it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So, and it is bringing quite fast levels of change.
Yeah.
So, in terms of based on your experience over your career, and adapting based on to any sort of change, what key cultural shifts do you think that organizations need to make to, I guess, adapt to and successfully adopt AI, as it's not going anywhere anytime soon?
You've asked the exact question that needs to be asked. I don't know. I think that I have some hypotheses around things. I know what it's likely to impact. I know some of the things it's likely to impact, certainly, and we've talked about some of them, those C's and other things. What it means to work at a place, why I would go join an organization, my sense of belonging there and care. Does it matter what I'm doing, and how much effort will I actually put in if a robot's going to do it better than me anyway? So I think issues around real productivity, real longevity. What will it mean for people when they're served by? What will it mean for our customers when we're served by algorithms rather than served by humans on the other side of it? Those are, I think, important to be framed up and need to be considered. But the impacts are going to be around culture, around people first, and around culture that leaders can begin to shape.
Yeah,
that's it. I mean, this technology is going to get to us. It is already embedded in how we work, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, and not in a matrix kind of we lost control kind of way. It's happening to us because we have there is something, and I'm not smart enough to know what this is. There is a drive in us to continue to take advantage of any affordance that comes our way. That's just the way we're wired. So now, I had a colleague, an old boss, who said to me, one of the smartest things someone ever said to me was, there's no perfect solution to something. When you develop a solution, you've always got to say, what problems will this raise for us at the same time? And I think what nobody's saying is, what problems will this raise for us, other than the economic ones and the ones around risk? And I think the societal problems that leaders can impact will be around what it means to still be part of their organization as AI becomes a bigger part of it, what role is there for people, and how do we still come together as a community and add value to what we're trying to provide those who use our products or services or whatever we deliver. Those are things that, because the robot doesn't care. And that, one of my C's, I think, how do I make those who are working here care? There's an old, I guess it's a joke, around kind of the factory of the future. And it's a machine and a man and a dog. And the dog is there to make sure the man never touches the machine, and the man is there to feed the dog. And that's it. And I think we're headed that way, where, don't touch it. It'll be fine. Let's find the right role for people. It's got to be more than just feeding the dog.
Yeah. There's so many things, like culturally, I think again, I suppose this is through experience of doing this podcast, and we've certainly asked questions internally at Impact about the usage of AI and what's we need to be careful using particular models that don't necessarily protect data, that type of thing. But I think certainly that asking questions is a key part to it, and having that dialogue and that openness for dialogue within an organization, I think, is super key. And again, that relates back to some of the C's that the 4 C's that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
Because I think there's that, but there's definitely that level of acceptance that AI isn't going anywhere, but we need to so what is the best way for us to, and there's another quote, it's that organizations won't be replaced, or people won't be replaced by AI, but they'll be replaced by somebody using it. And I think that there's an interesting question there about, well, okay, but it depends on the role, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was I think it was in Times Square, where there was a billboard that said something like, go on then AI, finish the rest of the scaffolding, or something around that. And so that, there are certain roles and jobs and things out there that won't be replaced by it, or at least not by a computer, maybe by a machine powered by a computer, but they're not necessarily by a computer. So there's certainly going to be things out there that are replaced by it. But in terms of that kind of organizational culture side of things, I think, it's that if everybody felt the same way about not adopting it, I think there would be problems. But equally, I think if everybody thought, yes, we should be using it, then there would be problems there. So you need that diversity of thought to kind of, and intertwine it really, to kind of, to get to make sure that the thinking is there to ensure that the adopting of AI is carefully thought through and then implemented in the right way.
Yeah. I mean, leaders are clamoring to find, affordable solutions around deployment. Leaders are not clamoring to say, let's get together and talk about what this means. Right. And so I think those of us, and you and I, and the organizations, us at Berman Leadership Development and you guys at Impact, talk to leaders all the time as part of our work. And we're obliged to start injecting these kinds of things. We do it. These kinds of questions around meaning and connection and growth and strategy and what impact on people into the work that we're doing, even if the client isn't asking for us at this point, because I think they're going to get there too. And many of the sophisticated ones are already beginning to find that question. But the work Impact does with teams of leaders I've seen can really help. You've got a fertile ground to begin injecting these questions, and as we do at Berman Leadership Development, to be able to say, as we're working in a coaching or in a cohort instance, to say, let's talk about the impact of all the progress we're making, what it will be on people. So
yeah, definitely. And that kind of brings me back to the ethics question. Because we've kind of briefly touched on it, but maybe I'll rephrase the way we've originally written this to kind of get a bit of a practical takeaway for our audience today, which is, so say you're speaking to a manager within a team, or a leader of people. What would you say, or maybe think broader as well, I guess, that what would be your key thinking around the ethics of AI, and particularly into kind of the leadership and leadership space? What do you think as maybe a kind of a top tip that people should be keeping in mind when thinking about AI and the usage of AI for teams and individuals within an organization?
Yeah. I think it's. I like the way you frame that, and I do think we can begin to ask leaders to consider, what will it look like when this is implemented for us? What will it feel like to be here? What will it mean to be part of our organization when so much of the work we do today is done differently or given to us as algorithms? Or do we become, the dog that stops people from touching the machine? Or is there another role for us? And how do I, as a leader, create a sense of, community care, connection, etc., as this evolves? Because that's not going to change. People will still need those things regardless, unless we're not going to employ anybody as an organization, and it will be the machine and the dog. And that's fine to understand. If that's where things are headed, then we sort of just have to roll over. I don't think anybody's talking about that yet. And until robots have sticky hands and can build scaffolds and climb walls, I think we're probably okay.
Yeah.
But we are obliged to put that question in front of leaders and help them develop a response to it, other than saying, well, I don't know. And I think it's to help them think through, what am I as a leader doing to think through what the work my team, my department, my company does, what that work means, how that will change as a result of this. I think that's a really important thing to get leaders to start to grapple with.
Definitely. And I think it would be interesting to, refer back to something you brought up earlier about the patent Apple has put out, that, what would be really interesting is what happens when there's that earbud, answering those questions on behalf of that individual, that essentially that question can be just transcribed by someone, and they can be provided with the answer instantly, pretty much after. Yeah, it's fascinating for sure. And it'll be interesting to see what type of world it is as that does happen. But on that, so you mentioned kind of your work alongside Impact before, and I didn't necessarily want to ask about your experience with Impact, but I am curious to get your take on, so one of our kind of our approach to help people learn is through experiential learning. That's our core learning methodology. We apply it to everything that we do, whether it's face-to-face or digital. But I guess the key part of that is that it is a human experience. The whole point is that you learn as an individual, as a team. You learn from the experiences that we essentially put you through, and through your own experiences after that. So can you imagine a future where AI would transform the style of learning? Would you think that it would be, do you think it would replace it? I guess it depends on, I'm curious to get your take on that.
I think there are some things to consider. I can imagine Impact running a group activity in which the AI doomsday scenario is kind of laid out as an experience for leaders to work through and consider as to what it would mean for us, right? So I think there's a positive way to get into it as learning. Will it change the value of experiential learning? I don't think so. There are, I think what AI in the learning space, from what I'm seeing, and there's a lot of investment and effort being taken here, will make ease of access to content for me. So what's happened in the arts, around, let's talk about music, where content has become devalued, right? People don't make anything from songs on Spotify anymore. Is what's happening with learning content. It's becoming really devalued. And what's going to matter is the experience that's provided to learners. Yeah. So I think the experiential part, whether it's right, so what matters today in the music business is, well, live music and how do I make money from those kinds of things, and streaming, et cetera, et cetera. We're learning content. All content is going to the same place, right? Where it's fungible, it's indistinguishable from each other. And so what matters is the experience. And I would say it even more forcefully than that, the context in which the learning is used. And I think places like Impact, even, for us at Berman Leadership Development, the context in which learning is applied and what's extracted in that context in conversations with others isn't an AI thing. It's a social act. There is a place for the use of AI in developing and curating learning content. Absolutely. And I think it will do that well. And instructional designers are going to be stuffed for a lot of what they do. But there is also a desire on the part of learners to have a social connection in the learning space. That I think a lot of what we learn as leaders and as aspiring to be leaders actually comes from my peers in these conversations, and what I discover about myself through peer conversations, which isn't AI mediated. That's artfully and carefully mediated by somebody who's skilled at that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think there's been so much to pick up on there, which I would love to. I mean, this whole episode, I've got so many extra questions that I needed to not stick to, because otherwise we would have gone on for a massive amount of time, which we just haven't got time to today. But I just wanted to kind of, before we go to our very last question, I wanted to kind of, thank you first of all for your time and for your and because we're very, very grateful for everybody who joins us for taking their time out their day to join us. So I'm also curious to get, based on what we've talked about today, is your response on a bit more about you, which is, and we ask this question to all of our guests, which is that if you were to start your career again, knowing what you know now, what, if anything, would be the best piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Yeah. What I've learned as I've gotten older is, and to this stage of my career, is to remember that this too shall pass. That whatever it is, if something's going great, this too shall pass. If I'm having a lousy day and I'm beating myself up about a small mistake or a terrible interaction or a course that didn't go well or something, this too shall pass. That we need to think about, I would tell myself to think about my career in terms of big arcs rather than individual instances of triumph or failure. Because that's how I've looked at it retrospectively, and it's worked out. I'm sort of happy where things have come up. Because otherwise you can get yourself really tied into knots and create a lot of anxiety and stress, which I probably did in the early parts of my career around things.
I'm smiling because because I've asked this question so many times, and I guess I've thought about the answer of my own, if I was to be asked myself, and that is a phrase which I've heard before and definitely resonated with, in the sense that it's because it's so true. Particularly when things are tough, that phrase comes in so useful, and it's such a valuable way of thinking. And so I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. So thank you very much. Listen, Michael, it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you today, and I would like to ask you loads more questions, but we simply haven't got time. So thank you ever so much for joining us again.
And my very pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been really great to listen to you and your kind of and all the questions that you've asked. as well. I think we can be asking so many more of those questions. So thank you again. Which just leaves me to say, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then please make sure you go and listen to or watch our back catalogue. It's all available on YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere else that you might get your podcast. If you'd like to find out more about Impact, then you can do so by seeing the link in the description, and we'll provide all of the other links that we think you'll need in that description too. So that just remains for me to thank Michael once more for joining us today. Thank you, Michael. And until the next time, take care.